Hey there, I'm Tracy Rigdon, and this is the Contrast Project Lounge podcast. Often random, but always relevant, always real, and practically nothing is off limits. This podcast is for you. Are you ready for this? Let's do it. Welcome back to the program, guys, and thank you so much for everyone coming and joining us in this edition of Wednesday Night Live with myself and my co-host, Mr. Jim Alabiso. Jim, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good now that my computer's running again. Otherwise, I was going to miss the show.
Yeah, Jim was just telling us before we started that he was having some computer problems earlier today. Glad you got it fixed.
Yeah, but it was great because I didn't want to miss out on Nate. The date with Nate.
Exactly.
How many times have you heard that?
A date with Nate.
I get Nate the Great, Nate Dog. It's an easy name to rhyme.
Well, Nate, let's start with a quick rundown here for our guests and
Sure.
people that are watching. Nate Monroe is an award-winning journalist, investigative journalist for the Florida Times-Union in Northeast Florida. And I will say this before we get started, Nate, to the people that are listening and watching, if you guys aren't following Nate on Twitter X, you're missing out. That's a fact. Ain't that right, Nate?
I have fun with it. Yeah, that's sure.
Well, listen.
I don't know what you're missing out on, but
there's always something good there. There's always something good there. If I missed something in the news or I missed something in the paper, I know that something pops up in your feed and it says, "Man, I got to go look that up now." I do. Listen, looking back, Nate, and there are many. Which of the stories do you believe, had the most significant impact on your audience or led to the most noticeable change?
Yeah. So, and I'll say this just by way of background. In the likely event, there are people who don't know my biography super well. I got to Jacksonville in 2013. Mm-hmm. So I've been here. October will make 11 years,
right?
And I was a beat reporter. I covered City Hall, and I did some investigative projects through 2019, and then I became a Metro columnist in January of 2019. Still do a lot of my own reporting. I get the privilege of sharing my perspective with people now too, in addition to that reporting, which is a lot of fun. And there have been a lot of stories that I feel like I've gotten to be a part of and had the privilege to be a part of. I do think the JEA corruption scandal or kind of series of scandals was probably the one where, if I go to a bar and tell people I work for the Times-Union, that's probably a story that they're very likely to associate with the newspaper, and
Sure.
Maybe the one that they spontaneously bring up on their own. That's something that happens, and when you work in local news, at least in the 21st century, which is the only century I've worked in local news, people don't always pay attention to their local news as much, and so it's rare to find a story that kind of penetrates the larger kind of public consciousness in a way. And I feel like the JEA story really did that. So, I mean, that's probably
it's like, I got to ask, is like JEA, it's kind of like when people, are at a Skinner concert and they go Freebird, or they go to a Coldplay concert and they go Yellow, and then they see Nate Monroe and they go JEA.
Yeah, I mean, that is probably a better company than I deserve, but yeah, sure. I think I would be happy if people associated me with the JEA story. I think that would be a fine thing for me to think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say
you know what? Every time I walk my dogs.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to tell Nate, every time I walk my dogs, I think of you because as I turn the corner of Riverside Avenue and James Street, I see that big old JA sign in Wayne Wood's yard.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, it really stirred people up. And like I said, I mean, it's rare to find a story that does that in local news. But you know, that it just was one of those kind of rare stories that touched enough people's lives. And, you know, go figure, when you start kind of screwing with our electricity and water and our ability to flush the toilet, people tend to take it pretty personally.
Certainly. And I got to tell you, the work that you did, the stuff that you dug up when you were working on that story, I mean, it really did shake things up. I mean, it blew the roof off the place.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that our work, I think my work and I think the work of some of my colleagues at the time was impactful. I will say that there were a lot of actors, like in city government and outside of city government, that also had really important roles in that. But I agree with you that I think the newspaper did did play a role. I mean, I think we did kind of. It's unusual. I mean, the typical model for like a newspaper investigative work is you take months, you dig into something, and you get all this time to put a story together. You put together photos and digital elements, and you kind of roll out this big kind of elegant package. And the JEA scandal, we didn't really have the luxury of doing that. It was kind of this real time rolling, almost kind of crisis. And so, like, looking back on our coverage, we didn't really get to do the big sort of investigative deep dive until the next year, because all of that stuff, we were sort of consumed with covering it as it was happening in real time. And that was kind of a very unique sort of challenge, I think. But, you know, both like, you know, I think ended up being impactful work and, you know, frankly, in some ways, a lot of fun too. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you sort of live for when you work for, you know, in local journalism, like moments where people actually need, you know, really kind of rely on that stuff.
Well, it probably changed the course of events, don't you think?
I'd like to think so. I think I think it's fair to say we probably played a role in that. Like I said, there are a lot of others that had, you know, hands in that too. But I would agree. I think it was impactful, and I think it did certainly help kind of raise public awareness, if nothing else, about what was going on.
Yeah.
So that definitely too.
I gotta ask. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
You know, stay on JA if you want to. Go ahead. I got some other stuff.
Well,
I can talk about JEA as much as you guys want.
Yeah, I figured as much. But you know, just you talking about it and the impact that you and your you know, the other players you know, had their roles in this, you know, the challenges and the rewards of the work that you're doing in the field of investigative journalism, they have to be, you know, you get home at the end of the day and you say, boy, that was a good day.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I was saying, I mean, and you always, I mean, we get into this business, people become journalists because they want to do impactful, important work. And you can go a long time in this field without finding a story like that. And I don't want to make light of, you know, that was a scary time for a lot of people who work for JEA. And so like, I want to be careful to say that it's not like, you know, we don't sit around hoping for bad things to happen, but we do want to do important work. And when we feel like we're in a situation where we're doing that, you know, like we didn't cause a corrupt CEO to try to underhandedly sell JEA, but we were sure happy to be there to help sort of out the fact that was happening. Right. And so like that's, you can go a long time without finding a story that sort of has that kind of impact. And so, yeah, I mean, like I said, it was a kind of rare thing to happen. And you
so
know,
when you're putting all these actors' actions on the table, does that make you fearful sometimes? I mean, you ever feel like there's a repercussion there? I've always been curious about that. You know, if you're doing an expose or something, you know, when I walk home, is somebody going to be behind me on the sidewalk.
Right. Well, I mean, we did find out, years after the fact, that one of the bidders for JEA, Florida Power and Light, had employed political consultants that did surveil me in my off time, and that ended up being a story that we wrote quite a bit about. So I would say, I mean, before we learned that, I actually did not really think much about it, because I thought, as awful as some of these local politicians can be, I kind of thought things like that were a little bit ridiculous. I mean, local journalists, this might shock people, but we're just residents of the city like everyone else. I mean,
Sure.
Our lives are not all that interesting or intriguing. So I would have said no, but I mean, having sort of gone through that, I mean, yeah, I do think about that stuff now. I do think about, I'm sure not going to leave my phone in a public place. I'm sure not going to, make a stupid decision coming home from the bar. I mean, these are all things that, So yeah, I mean, the short answer to your question is yes, I do think about that stuff now.
How about now? You're kind of talking about Shad Khan a little bit now. Is he going to run away? What's going to happen to Jacksonville? How tight is that leash? And what happens to our investments, that we've made in collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I don't worry about, again, as I said, as a general rule, I mean, I don't think most people are sadistic enough to be following journalists or doing anything underhanded. I would extend that sense of good faith to, the Jaguars organization. I mean, I'm not worried about that. I think, I mean, there's lots of money on the line but also that deal's going to happen. So there's nothing I could say or write that is going to change that trajectory. So maybe on like JEA, that's kind of in the bag already. So.
Well, the stadium is 29 years old, so it needs a little maintenance anyway. So
it does. It needs maintenance. The city owns it, and I think most people who have been to a Jaguars game in the last 30 years would agree that it needs a roof. So, I mean, there are aspects of this. There are bells and whistles about the stadium renovation that you can sort of nitpick. But, I mean, the concept of the basic renovation is something most people kind of think needs to happen anyway. So,
yeah. Do you think it's the renovation's popular among the citizens of Jacksonville? Are we 50-50? Where do we look? Where do we stand as a community?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, I myself would never pretend to speak for the popular opinion in Jacksonville, but there was a University of North Florida poll that took place last week, and we got those results early this week. I mean, so we know that just should the city spend money on a stadium renovation and partner with an NFL owner? This is not a Jacksonville specific thing. Most people don't love that. But this particular deal comes with something called a community benefits agreement. This is a $300 million investment split down the middle between the Jaguars and the city that would invest money in workforce training, programs to mitigate homelessness. There's money for neighborhood improvements, particularly for the East Side, which is the neighborhood around the stadium. There's money to accelerate work on downtown parks. There are several parks in downtown that are sort of slated to come online over the next several years. That makes the deal more popular. The inclusion of that community benefits agreement with this stadium renovation plan pushes support for that to about 56%, which is surprising. That community benefits agreement is very, very, very popular with people.
Sure.
And I did find the level of popularity of that in the fact that it's so popular, it takes something that is not supported by most people and makes it supported by most people to be really remarkable.
yeah, it's kind of a you hear both sides of it for sure. You know, you have the people that say that it's you know, far too much money to be spending on a new stadium. We don't need a new stadium. Why is the city doing it? If you know, if Shad Khan wants this stadium deal, you know, why doesn't he pay for it himself? And like you said before, it seems that a lot of people making these, you know, real negative, you know, bringing up, you know, negative connotations about the stadium and Shad Khan and, you know, the whole deal. Uh,
Well, let's face it.
they don't seem to understand that the city owns the stadium.
Yeah. But I mean, but let's face this. Like, you know, it's like, first of all, not everybody is a football fan.
That's true.
Not everybody could afford to go to a. Not everybody can afford to go to a football game.
That's right.
And the ones that are living in crack streets and food deserts, you know, they're wondering, well, if we're spending $1 zillion over here, why can't you fix the pothole on my street? Why can't I have better protection from our Jacksonville sheriff's office? You know, and I'm not demeaning them at all. They do great work. But, you know, it's what about our city services? Because, you know, we are that largest city geographically, and it needs a lot of maintenance, needs a lot of work, needs a lot of upkeep, et cetera, et cetera. Look how long it took for Memorial Park to get redone.
Yeah.
And redone.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And probably will so again.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and I am sympathetic to those, you know, to these arguments. Like, I'm sympathetic to people who have an issue with, you know, what we do with the NFL, which is, you know, we socialize the costs and we allow the owners to keep all the profits. Like, that is not capitalism. You know, that is a very rigged kind of game. And you know, these NFL owners are often, as Shad Khan, as some of the richest people on the planet. And so, you know, there is part of me that is like deeply sympathetic to people who have problems with that. I don't really like it myself.
Yeah.
But on some level, I mean, look, like, this is also, if Jacksonville wants to be an NFL city, this is the situation. There is a price to being an NFL city. There's no universe where Jacksonville is not going to try to make a deal with Shad Khan. And so, you know, as a columnist, I mean, there are times where I feel like political reality isn't something I need to always acknowledge, but this is one of those times where it's like, it's just not useful for me to debate the underlying principle, because a deal is right.
The other side of the game, the other side of the coin too, Nate, is that you know, the person that lives in that neighborhood that has a pothole and is in a food desert might get a job because of this renovation, right? So there's always the jobs argument, and then there's always the jobs excuse, and there's always the job game in almost everything we do in the city. But sometimes it's true, you know, especially if they're doing some stuff on the east side, right?
Right. Well, and they also just might enjoy it. And the city, you know, local government can do things, can fund things that we just enjoy. I mean, that is a thing that we, you know, as a community, like, agree to. The symphony, the you know, public arts funding. I mean, we do things that are just for people's enjoyment and to make this a better place to live. And so, you know, people are going to have varying opinions on whether an NFL team does that. But again, you know, I think that question has been kind of resolved in the city. So it's not really like even something worth debating at this point.
Yeah, it's a done deal.
So, I mean, it's a complicated issue, and you can certainly, like I said, you can nitpick it. And in a lot of ways, I myself am not comfortable with this, but it's some version of this is going to happen. And so I sort of view my role as just kind of trying to contextualize what it means for people and what it means for the city going forward. I mean, there will be real financial consequences for the city in investing so much money in the stadium.
Yeah, but and like Jim just mentioned too, about, you know, those people that possibly would be, you know, gain employment because of the new stadium. It's going to have fewer seats in the stadium, but the cost of the tickets are going to go up for several reasons, because fewer seats and because of, hey, you know, this high-end stadium we're going to get. But during the course of the construction of the renovation project, which is going to take approximately 2 years to do, that's going to be 2 years worth of high-paying construction jobs.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there will be a positive. There will be some economic stimulus from the stadium project. Sure. I think economists, for whatever it's worth, tend to think that just as a matter of economics, these deals don't often scratch out in city's favor. You'd have to work kind of hard to find someone who thinks that these deals just on a dollars and cents basis really work. But
right,
again, these deals are about more than that. I mean, there is some intangible kind of value to being an NFL city. Now, whether that's enough to make up for the amount of money that's being spent is something you can debate all day long. But I mean, it's more complicated than like, do we get a 1-to-1 ROI? I mean, the answer to that is no, we don't. But there are intangible benefits, and it just depends. It's a value judgment at that point.
Yeah, and you're talking about money being spent, by the city, and recently there was something that happened coming out of Tallahassee. What with the lights on the bridges, and I read somewhere some people were saying, well, we don't need those lights. Why are they spending taxpayers' money on those lights on bridges all over the state? But in particular, Governor Ron DeSantis is, mandated that the bridges be lit up.
About colors, isn't he?
Exactly. He's wanting now he's mandating that the bridges be colored in red, white, and blue through Labor Day.
Right.
That's okay as long as he's not restricting any other colors.
Yeah. I mean,
well, for the month of June, he is. It can only be red, white, and blue, and actually, I think it has to be red, white, and blue every night.
Yeah.
So, in the free state of Florida, we have some diktats that
Don't
we have.
Don't get me started, Nate.
Yeah, I mean, the Jacksonville Transportation Authority, they put this kind of light system on the Acosta Bridge several years ago, and the whole intent behind it was just supposed to be this fun, cool thing, and hey, we can light it up in these different schemes. We can honor all these different causes every night of basically every night of the year if we want. And it's just become, on a couple of occasions now, just this kind of massive like political football because of pride colors.
Right.
And I mean, it really is a shame to see that something that was just supposed to be fun and make people feel good is kind of being exploited by, the governor to divide people. That's really what this is. I mean, nobody cared. There was no issue with JTA lighting up the Acosta Bridge for Pride Month. Nobody took an issue with it until the state decided.
I didn't see any protesters on the other side of the bridge.
There wasn't.
Walking the walkway.
Yeah, there wasn't.
With signs. The only person that had a problem with it seems to be,
Seems to live in the governor's mansion.
Yeah.
Well, the governor of the state of Florida has got a knack for throwing a little bit of division in for every bill he signs.
He does. I wrote something about this after Bob Graham died. That this governor and I was not here when Bob Graham was governor, but grew up in a time where there were politicians who still viewed their strength as addition, not subtraction. And I feel like so much of this political moment is just about division. And Ron DeSantis, like, he doesn't want people who don't support him right now to support him. He wants division. Like, that's actually like an active goal that he is pursuing, and he has succeeded. I mean, he has made all of us more bitter, and he's made us all more suspicious of our neighbors, and we're all crueler and meaner than we used to be. And I just find that to be really, I mean, it's really sad and frightening, and it's unfortunately something I think a lot about. It's not
There
great.
just seems to be there's more important things in the world to pick on Mickey Mouse and the colors of your bridge lights.
Exactly.
Without a doubt. And certainly in Florida, right? Like a state that is sinking into the sea and under threat constantly by natural forces. Yes, there are definitely more important things to worry about that a governor should be concerned about.
My goodness.
Well,
and his tentacles are reaching far beyond what a lot of people may understand. Some of these bills, of course, like bills always are, they're loaded with, pork. But it's when he sticks something in there, it's definitely something that people should be aware of. I mean, these little things that he's doing, it started back when he was, bad mouthing, drag shows and that kind of thing. And now he's jumped on the, rainbow, colors for the bridges, and actually making it a mandate, which, that's just overreach.
It is, and I mean, I think like a common theme of the DeSantis era, and even before DeSantis, I mean, this is a project the legislature has been working on now for a long time. Is rolling back the concept of home rule. Home rule being what it sounds like it is, which is that local governments should have autonomy and that communities kind of get a lot of latitude to decide what works for them. Tallahassee has been passing in every session, considers more bills that preempt cities and counties' ability to do things, and essentially taking power away from local governments and saying, if you want to mandate that restaurants don't have, plastic straws, well, you can't do that anymore. And, sometimes it sounds kind of silly, but sometimes it becomes rather serious. I mean, when you start limiting what cities can do, I mean, the concept of home rule is what helped modernize Florida. I mean, this is something that did not exist in the Constitution until the 20th century. And home rule is kind of credited with, I mean, cities help policymakers figure out what works and what doesn't. And when you restrict what they can and can't do, you're really limiting your understanding of like how policies can affect things.
And it ignores the culture of the specific community.
It does. That's right.
Because Miami is much different than Jacksonville, and Jacksonville's much different than Silver Springs. And, everybody has their own thing. It's just kind of weird that, especially when we're talking about climate change and free Florida, that we're talking about straws and what color lights you put. Yeah. So it's very disturbing, especially when, the argument about lights on a bridge, this small of an issue. The argument about straws is this small of an issue. But the argument about climate change, and why are we putting more energy into that? Why isn't the governor talking more about that? Seems to be an issue that's my dogs. They love one of them. It seems to be that we're talking about people's lives here, that we're talking about people's homes. And by the way, I got to show you this. We're just going to bring this up. Remember Times Union?
Oh, yeah.
Building?
Of course I do.
Right? So I pass this every day because I live on Riverside Avenue. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, okay, so we're going to build a Whole Foods, right?
That's what they're going to put in there, I think.
Condos, apartments,
a
parking garage.
Yep.
After we dredge the river, we're going to have the craziest hurricane season yet. Isn't this place going to be like underwater in 10 years? How many people are going to have to evacuate those apartments once they're done?
Right.
Well, the city has a resiliency.
And YMCA did the same thing, Nate.
Exactly.
They moved it closer. As a matter of fact, the pool is right next to the river.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like just in the aggregate, Florida generally, and definitely Jacksonville on a more specific level, is not taking sea level rise seriously enough. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
we're still allowing lots of really valuable development to be going on the water. The city, in some cases, is providing taxpayer support for development on the water, on the waterfront. And I'm not really convinced that we understand the vulnerability of some of these places in this world that we are making for ourselves. And I'm actually certain of that. And so, I agree with you. These specific projects, I don't want to like say, what their level, like specific level of vulnerability is, except to say anything on the water in Florida is generally going to be, I would be worried about, especially as we get, further in time here.
Sure.
I don't think it's a problem that we take seriously enough. I don't think our state leadership takes it seriously enough. DeSantis doesn't like state employees even mentioning climate change. So that's just like not a very good starting place.
No.
And the other thing too is, while we're at it, we've pretty much covered up the river. It's kind of like we shouldn't call it Riverside Avenue anymore, because it's not on the riverside. St. John's Avenue is, and the part of Riverside Avenue that is on the river is barriered by commercial enterprises, with the exception of Riverside Arts Market and the YMCA is a commercial enterprise.
Right.
And we have really no access to the water. Like if you go to Augusta, Georgia, for example, as the Savannah River goes through it, you can actually walk up to the river and put your toes in the water. Right?
Yeah.
There's no place. There's only one place. There's only one beach in Jacksonville on the St. Johns River, and that's at JU. Right? Everything, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. Something a colleague and I did a very, very long story several years ago after Hurricane Irma had, flooded downtown and Riverside and San Marco. And it was just this kind of, in the communities along the Trout River. That was a really shocking event, particularly since Irma was a tropical storm by the time it reached the city. We looked at the history of the St. Johns River and the kind of cumulative amount of work that the federal government has done dredging the river to make it a suitable shipping channel. And, one thing we found was that the Army Corps of Engineers has never studied what the cumulative impacts have been of dredging the river to 40 feet, and now it's 47 feet. They've never considered what a deepened river would mean for storm surge.
Right. I used to go to those meetings. Over at Jacksport and Army Corps, and listen to it, and they'll find a study that suits the purpose.
Exactly.
That's what I found.
Yeah.
We now have 47 feet, more storm surge, more hot domes, hotter ocean,
right,
more salinity, right, and we're building stuff close to the water. And some of these things are technically bridges. Remember, like the old parking lot by the courthouse, right? That was technically called a bridge,
right,
because the river ran through it,
right,
under it.
We also have more what are called compound events. So we have more storms that bring both powerful storm surge and lots of rain. And in a city like Jacksonville, where the river is our drainage basin, rain and storm surge are very lethal combinations. That is compound events are, that's the one thing that's being studied a lot, is like climate change is creating more of these storms that bring both of those sort of devastating effects. And that's something we've never considered. And, people, I don't think that there is broad understanding about how much we've really manipulated the river over time. The St. John's in its natural state, the mouth of the river bottomed out in low tide. Boats could not pass the St. John's River. And we've taken that very shallow, wide river and we've channelized it. We've built jetties. We've made it more efficient and deeper. We've taken out rocks and seagrass and all kinds of things that can slow water down. Like friction is a thing underwater, just like it is on land. And we've made the river, we've connected it more to the ocean than it's ever been. And certainly more than it
And
ever
as
was.
an estuarial city, that means a lot of impact for us.
It does. I mean, there's
Duval County. Yeah,
the
Duval
fact
County's
that you can
got a
see
couple
like
thousand
dolphins
miles of shoreline
in downtown is really cool. It's also kind of like, yeah, this is a kind of an oceanic waterway in downtown. I mean, it's in downtown in particular, the river gets very narrow. There's a very, very deep 80 to 90 foot section around the train bridge in downtown. I mean, it's a very tidally.
I used to swim the St. John's, but I still do occasionally. And when we swim, we have a thing that we haven't done it in the last couple of years, but we have this thing called Up the River Downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And we use it to raise money for Special Olympics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a bunch of open water swimmers. We got a bunch of kayak escorts. JSO comes with us, the fire department, St. John's River Keeper, Jimmy Orr supported Lisa Rhyme, all those great folks. And we'd have 20 or 30 of us swim from Jacksonville University, that beach, to swim to Riverside Arts Market. Man, when you get under that Main Street bridge and start heading for the railroad bridge, I clocked myself going, because I had a GPS on my head, I was going like 8.6 miles an hour underneath the railroad bridge.
Whoa.
Right where it narrows, just like you said. And you just get shot right through there, like you're putting your thumb on the end of a hose, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's scary because the more work we do in terms of dredging and accommodating larger and larger ships and eliminating the friction, the worse it's going to get.
Yeah, Lisa Reineman, the St. John's River Keeper, mentioned.
I mean, I do think that, like, when we did that story, we found that there are a small number of people that do research the kind of cumulative effects of dredging and storm surge. And I mean, they certainly found that there is an impact, and they studied the St. John's River and they believe that there is an impact. Again, the Army Corps has never done a study to quantify it for themselves. But I mean, it has undoubtedly made the city a lot more vulnerable than it otherwise would have been, especially if what's the nightmare scenario is like a hurricane comes, off West Africa and hits the city right like at the mouth of the St. John's. Like that would be really scary. That would be a really, really frightening.
And then they come up with it sure would. I mean, we've had some frightening moments there. Even Black Creek, I have a friend of mine.
Yep.
The water went up to the second floor of her house.
Yeah, Black Creek, man. I feel like that floods every time we get a storm of any, tropical depression, tropical storm.
Yeah, people think it's just going to be Jacksonville, but no, it goes all the way down.
Oh yeah,
to Clay, and St. John's County. As a matter of fact, when we used to swim across the river, we used to swim from Fleming Island Marina to County Dock in Mandarin. It's almost 4 miles across that way, go up and around the peninsula and whatever. And over there, the maximum speed of the river at that time, which was like 2012, 11, 12, 13, 14, was like maybe a knot. I would imagine that's picked up a little bit.
Yeah, I bet it has.
And that dredging,
even down as far as Green Cove.
Yeah, and that dredging also has affected,
an effect.
like Jim said, the salinity.
About people that we think that St. John's River is that only river that flows north, and that's just a big myth. But that's what people are taught.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not true.
Right.
At least in the first 50, 60, 70, 80 miles of it. We get a flood tide and we get an ebb tide and all that. So,
we were talking.
Hey, I wanted to ask you.
Yeah,
I don't know where Trace went. He might have lost his connection.
I'm still here.
Or his computer might have fried.
Right.
But,
I'm still here.
Once again, I drive by Brooklyn all the time, and I'm going to show you something. So I was in the Czech Republic recently to see an art exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just kind of move this a little bit so we can see. So this is Brooklyn housing.
Mm-hmm.
This is Soviet era housing in the Czech Republic, right?
I knew where this was going as soon as I saw the pictures.
So, so where's it going? So let's look at this thing. Let me get my face out of the way. So let's take a look at this. Unity Plaza, right? There he comes. So we got Unity Plaza over here on the left side with the balconies. And then they had all that land on the other side. And now what they have to look forward to when they sit on their balconies with a beer is a parking garage.
Right.
What happened to Unity Plaza?
I know, right?
Look at even the apartments on the other side of the fountain look like Soviet era tenement housing.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
So, it's like that's kind of my thing right now is I'm really upset about what's happened to Brooklyn. They've taken the vision, they've taken the view of the river away, which was a very valuable part of the Brooklyn. As a matter of fact, the house I live in is right on the corner of King and Riverside Avenue. And Wayne Wood showed me a picture that was taken from the shore of the St. Johns River, looking at the house that was built in 1896, right? And you get almost a clear shot. Now I have to stand on my balcony on the third floor, and if I stand on my toes and squint my eyes the right way at the right time of day, I can see a little sliver of water past the collapsing parking. Oh, did I say that? The parking garage. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, we just are living in this era of this like the explosion of this multifamily residential housing that's like stick built, low to mid rise. It all looks very generic and very cheap.
Matchstick.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Matchstick. Yeah. 220 Riverside. I mean, that place. I mean, so I came here when Brooklyn, where the Fresh Market is, that was all just kind of still a dirt lot. And 220 was under development. And I mean, that was such a hyped thing. And it is just disappointed from the beginning. I mean,
I worked there. I worked as a consultant there for a little while. I worked with Alex over at Hallmark, and me and Christy Lee Schatz worked over there trying to make something of it. And I really appreciated Alex's vision because it was a great vision, but it was unattainable architecturally. How can you do a ticketed event in a place where there's restaurants? And in order to get to the restaurant, you got to go through the ticketed event.
Right.
And then of course people, are trying to go to sleep and there's a concert going on Friday night.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I feel like some of it is in this town, especially. I mean, I think we fall for this. Every developer thinks that their project is this like precious little baby and it's going to be catalytic. And there are all these buzz terms that get thrown around. And like, at the end of the day, it's like, dude, you're building a goddamn apartment with a pizza parlor on the first floor. Like that's like it's just, they always think, every developer thinks their project
you're building this.
Yeah, it's like you're just building a mixed use development. There's millions of these things. Like it's not that big a deal, and we fall prey to that all the time. It's like this is just salesman. It's salesman bullshit, And
I don't know about Hallmark because all I knew was Alex.
Yeah,
and I know that.
I'm not saying. Yeah, and I'm not saying. I'm not implying that.
I know he was sincere. Yeah.
I just think we all care about the things we work on, but at the end of the day, I mean, sometimes, like I said, there's all this excitement about, a mixed use development. It's like, okay, well, those exist everywhere. They don't happen to exist in downtown Jacksonville, but that doesn't mean they're not pretty standard, should be pretty routine kind of developments. And the 220 to me was a good example of something that just was very oversold. And the reality was,
remember all the promotions and all of that.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, this is an apartment complex with a pizza place on the first floor. Okay. This is not going to transform the city. It's, maybe good.
Well, I'm going to give them an E for effort because they definitely tried. But and then of course they slapped that other building right up against it. So you can have a beer with your friend that lives on the balcony 3 feet away from you on the other side.
I mean, some of it is just like the price of living in a city that has not had enough progress is that we get very excited about things that, are good, but they're just lots of other cities have these. And I would say, you know, the Emerald Trail is a good example of this. Great project. I really support it. I love the Emerald Trail. We've literally been talking about it for 100 years. Like that it has been an idea in the city for 100 years to do the Emerald Trail. Yeah. And now that we're doing it, because we should have done it all that time ago, and most cities have one, it's almost like we've turned this project into something like, you know, is the Emerald Trail going to like fundamentally transform downtown? People might be disappointed when they see that. Like
I don't think like the S line transformed downtown, but it's still a good thing.
It's not. I'm not saying people. It's not a good thing. It is 100% a good thing. It's 100% a thing we should be doing.
Sure.
But people are going to look at it and they're going to say, "This is a sidewalk with green paint on it." Like it's. I mean, that is what it is, and it's great and it's important. But you know, because we should have done this 20 years ago, we build things up in our minds. You know, the sort of public consciousness, and everyone's disappointed when it happens because it's like, I mean.
You know,
this is a common amenity.
I think it's this excitement that you're talking about. It's like, oh, you know, we're a fairly new city. We're, you know, 120 years old since the fire, and we get excited about stuff. And because we do, we get infatuated. Then city planning goes out the window.
Right. Yeah, we have an addiction to this idea too that like this is the one thing that's going to like put us over the top, and there's never a one thing. It's a collection of
It's a stadium, Nate.
Yes, that was in the back of my mind. I mean, yeah, we love this. We love this. It's just the one thing we need, and that's not how good cities work. There are a million things to love in great cities in America, not just like a stadium or one mixed use development with a fountain in the front. I mean, it's like there's lots of things to like in a big city.
What's happened to the news business in Jacksonville? I wanted to ask you about that because I know in some of your talking points you had, you know, some TU, you know, with some history there and how it's changed, and then just the whole news thing in Jacksonville as it is.
So I mean, it's not a mystery that like the newspaper business has been, you know, in a rough spot for a few decades now, and so this trend is not specific to the Times-Union or to Jacksonville by any means. But having said that, I mean the transformation I've seen. So as I said, I got here in 2013. We were still at our, you know, the old Riverside campus at the time, and just for people's benefit, I mean, the Times-Union was a newspaper, but it was also a publishing company. And that Times-Union site was an industrial site. I mean, we had a printing press. We actually physically made stuff there. We had clients, you know, we published stuff for companies other than the Times-Union. And there was a whole marketing department just for that. And, you know, there were several hundred employees that worked at the Times-Union. And just in the newsroom, there were about 100 people in the newsroom when I got here. And at that time, it was thought that 100 people in the newsroom was totally inadequate to cover a city of this size, right? Like when I got here, they were already saying we are totally depleted. Today, you know, almost 11 years later, I mean, we have like 24, 25 people in the newsroom. And so if the attitude then was, we don't have the people, well, you know, we definitely don't have the people now. And, you know, the printing press is gone. We're not in the old campus anymore. We're in the Wells Fargo Tower in downtown. And it's not we're not an industrial business anymore. We're, you know, we have a website and we have reporters and we just kind of do that. I mean, it is a fundamentally different business than what it used to be.
I remember
print media has taken a hit over the years.
Watching the trucks pull up, and then all the stacks and stacks of newspaper machines. People would drop their quarter in and open it up, and they were just stacked. I don't know why there were so many of them over there at the time, but
and so it's. I mean, this is a decline that, you know, again has been pretty ubiquitous, and so that the era of big kind of metro daily newspapers with, you know, these big newsrooms, I mean, that is over. And I think what we're going to see replace those institutions is a kind of diffuse network of, you know, smaller kind of for-profit news companies like the Times-Union is today. some nonprofit news outlets that have a little bit more of a niche focus that'll kind of fill in the gaps. I mean, and to some degree, we're living that now. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been a wild transformation. And I really don't think that people writ large have kind of internalized the depletion of local news, especially. I mean, and Jacksonville is frankly kind of lucky. I mean, we still have a pretty active local press here, but not every city has that.
Yeah, no, that's true. But even the stuff that's being printed now, even like our local magazines like Folio/EU and that John owns and runs and all that, it's different now because they used to have, employed journalists, and then they became freelance. So they're kind of like a little bit out of work. A couple of really good ones, as a matter of fact. But speaking of EU, Joni made a comment in here. I'm looking off to the side. Who was on the cover of EU? I took the picture because she was swimming underneath the bridge. And she wanted to remind everyone that Unity Plaza, since we were talking about that a minute ago, and she's right, also had a mission and a vision that was rooted in holistic wellness and yoga. And those themes did continue for a while, which they did. So there was, when we talk about the design, that's one thing. But on the other hand, she's absolutely right. So it did put a lot of good into the community, hype or not, for a while. It gave us some other opportunities.
Sure. I should say when I say that, I have in retrospect found that project to have been overhyped. I mean, I don't mean to suggest it was a failure. And I think that, Brooklyn, for ways good and bad has totally transformed since 220 started. When I say it was overhyped, I interviewed Alex Coley, when that project was under development, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing something to me about how he felt the hand of God in that project. And so when I say that I felt like it was a little bit oversold, when I look at 220 Riverside today, I don't feel like I feel the hand of God in that project. Just to be clear, it's an apartment complex with retail on the first floor. And again, because we have parts of downtown and adjacent to downtown that took a while to develop and are still taking a while to develop, I think we get a little bit overexcited about stuff that is in essence like pretty basic. And that's what I really think 220 is. A place like Tampa has 1,220,000 Riversides. That's just,
Yeah. I was born in Brooklyn, but not this one.
the other Brooklyn.
I was born in Shore Road Hospital on the Hudson River.
Oh, okay. The less illustrious Brooklyn.
Yes, the less illustrious. It didn't have a 220 though.
Yeah.
So what, just as far as Jacksonville is concerned, what do you enjoy most about our city beside Tracy Rigdon?
I came here like a lot of people. This is a city of transplants. I think in a lot of ways there are. There is a very proud kind of base of Jacksonville natives, of course, but like a lot of Florida, it's a transplant city, and it can be a place that kind of happens to people, right? Like you move here for work, and then you wake up 5 years later and you still live here, and you didn't expect to live here. Right. Like that's, I will admit that has been sort of my experience here. Now, my wife and I love, we live out at the beach, and we love that. Since getting here, I got married in this town, had a child in this town. We own a house in this town. And so I'm very bought in. I love the diversity of the city. I think
big time.
You can find, this is said a lot, and it's a little bit of a cliche, but there are lots of really cool, very diffuse, frustratingly disconnected, but really cool neighborhoods here.
Sure.
You can get a flavor
like the Beaches community, and then you have the Riverside community,
Right.
And then you have the Avondale community, right? And the South Side community, and they're all different.
Right. And Murray Hill, you have cool places like Turkeyville is a really neat place. Like I love, JP Small Stadium is a really neat, there are lots of places here that are really cool that are just disconnected. And I wish, I mean, if I ruled the world, that would be the policy project I would be working on, is how do we connect these places better with, public transit.
The monorail.
Right.
Monorail from Murray Hill.
The crazy dream for a long time.
I know.
But
well, I used to live in the urban core years and years ago, and I was one of those very few people that would ride the Skyway. I could hop on it right around the corner from my apartment and go to San Marco, in just a couple minutes, and I enjoyed the ride. But again, it's one of those things that practically no one uses anymore. I mean, it does serve, in theory, does have a purpose, but it's, again, and now they're talking about, extensions to that, and the autonomous vehicles, and, going up and down Bay Street. It's another one of those things that the city does.
It's never going to be MARTA.
No. The city has these big dreams, and they the thing about the city of Jacksonville is so much discussion around each project. I mean, they go for years and years and years, and they hire consultants, and they have these meetings, and just like the Jaguars with the stadium, having their huddles around town.
Yes, I agree. Things seem to take longer here than they take anywhere else on the planet. I do have lots of frustration about that. I will say one other thing that I do really like about Jacksonville, and I talk a lot about things it doesn't do well. One thing Jacksonville does better than I think almost any other major city in Florida, every other major city in Florida, public access to the water here is great. I mean, the city has, beautiful free boat launches. Getting to the beach is easy. There's lots of public parking. Like, I mean, I did a turn in Pensacola at a newspaper there, and just needless to say, getting to the beach in other communities in this state are not as simple as it is here. Right. I do think we have good access to the water. It could be better, but
so much of it.
Yeah.
Right?
So
we got springs within an hour. We have intracoastal. We have an ocean. We've got St. John's River. We've got creeks and estuaries. I mean, it's really great. That's why I'm here.
It's somewhere around 2,000 miles of shoreline just in the Duval County. That's counting the beach.
Yes.
That's counting the rivers, the creeks, estuaries. There's around 2,000 miles of shoreline.
When I was doing a lot of swim races, I would get into the Atlantic Ocean in the morning and swim the sunrise, and then haul ass across the state and get to Sarasota, where the next race was going to be that Saturday, and swim the sunset. Can't do that anywhere else.
Tourism materials say that the city is more shoreline than any other in the United States. With the caveat that I have not fact checked that, it certainly would seem to bear out. I mean, I can buy that.
And Duval County has one of the highest numbers of parks.
We do, although I think that's kind of a technicality, and I don't know.
Yeah, some parks are just a park bench and a trash can.
Yeah, and I think the efforts to sort of track, the quality of those parks across various cities, I don't know that Jacksonville always does very well in those lists, but yes, we do have lots of public land, which is great.
And things are happening. I mean, when I first started doing Riverside Arts Market, it was A, and now it's Z. I mean, sometimes you go past there and it's just packed. Yeah. So it's definitely, and then we also have another one on Park Street, kind of a thing, and they have one at Murray Hill, kind of an arts and farmers market, and then now they got the skate park being built. As a matter of fact, we're talking to James Smith about coming on the show here soon.
Oh, cool.
And talking about the skate park.
Yeah,
I will. As a matter of fact, he owes me some info to get on the show. So if you're listening, James, we want you out here. Because I'm really looking forward to, and I can't do it myself because I got too many broken bones and I don't want to break anymore. But still, I think it's just a wonderful idea. And he's worked 10 years to make that happen. Like you said, everything takes a long time.
It does. Well, I tell you, it's been a wonderful conversation with you guys tonight. Before
Yeah.
we go, Nate, have you got any closing thoughts for us?
Gosh. I wish I had something really prepared. No, I appreciate you guys having me on. This was a lot of fun, and I do want to emphasize what we just talked about, which is that I spent a lot of my professional time bitching, for lack of a better term, about like the things Jacksonville does not do right, but we've made a home here because we really like it, and
Yeah.
there is a lot to recommend the city, and so. That's just a thing people don't hear out of me very often. So I'm happy to leave it with that.
Okay, that sounds great. That sounds great.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I
Jim,
really appreciate you being on. I was looking
Hey.
forward to this.
Yeah, thanks,
Yes,
guys.
sir.
Jim,
you so much.
have you
Let's
got
do
any
it again.
closing thoughts for our audience?
No, I think Nate's was great and super appropriate.
Absolutely.
That we talk about the fun stuff here as well. And I
Absolutely.
love living here. And
Yep.
I wouldn't
Yep.
trade it for anything right now.
I wouldn't either. I've been all over the
No.
place, and I always come home.
But thanks our guests for showing up over here in the chat, Joni, Daniel,
Yep.
etc. So for chiming in here. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, thank you,
And
thank
then
you,
this
everyone.
will be Tracy. You're gonna post this
It'll be
once you
posted.
edited out all of Nate's cuss words, and then
Yeah.
post it on.
and the spot where I was dropped offline there for some darn reason. So it'll be up online tomorrow evening.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks,
Thank
Tracy.
you so much, guys.
See you guys.
Peace, love. Bye-bye.
Well, that's a wrap. Another fantastic episode of the podcast. You can find us on all the social media platforms, wherever you surf, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, Threads, wherever. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. And on our YouTube channel, don't forget to like, share, comment, and smash that subscribe button. If you're streaming audio for the podcast, you can find us wherever you get your favorite podcast programs. In the meantime, I like to tell everybody, take care of yourselves and each other. Until next time, peace.